We're now on the top of Daf Mem Heyom Beis, and we're up to Ki Itmar, which is 3 lines down from the top of the Om. And the Gemara is now rejecting the proof. The Gemara says you can interpret a Ki Itmar to Rav Yehuda when Rav Yehuda says the Vlad of a Chetio Evet Cheti Ben Chorin Abol Bas Yisrael is Ein Lo Takona Kagon the Kadesh Bas Yisrael. This half Eved, half Ben Chorin was Makadish Bas Yisrael, and afterwards he had a relationship with her. When he's Makadish her, only half of him, his Ben Chorin half, could be Makadish her and make her into an Ashes each, not the Tzad Avda Shebo. Now, when he consummates the marriage with an intimacy, Nimtza Tzad Avda Shebo, Mishtamesh or Mishamesh be Ashes each. He's now having a relationship with an Ashes each, because we see him as 2 different persona, and his Tzad Ben Chorin Shebo made her into an Ashes each. So his Tzad Evet Shebo is now having a relationship with an Ashes each, and therefore the Vlad is a Mamzer. In what situation were they machshir the Vlad of an Evet Abol Bas Yisrael? That's only when an Evet had a relationship with a Pnuya non-married woman. But if he has a relationship with an Ashes each, the Vlad is a Mamzer. And here, in the case of a Chatzi Evet Chatzi Ben Chorin is Mekadesh Bas Yisrael, he is having a relationship with an Ashes each, meaning the Tzad Avda Shebo is having a relationship with the Tzad Ben Chorin Shebo, meaning with the Isha as an Ashes ish married to the Tzad Ben Chorin Shebo. And therefore, if he were to have a relationship with a Chetia, if a Chetia Ben Eved, Chetia Ben Chorin would have a relationship without Kedushin, then this woman is a Pnuya, she's not an Ashes each, and the Tzad Avdus is not being mishtamish with an Ashes each, and therefore the Vlad might indeed be kosher, and it's not a Mamzer. So the Gemara now says that we should not interpret Rabbi Yehuda that when he says Vlad ein lo takana, dafka in a case where he had a relationship with an Ashes each, but if he had a relationship with a Pnuya, the Vlad would not be a Mamzer, because ha'amri nardoi mishmeid Rabbi Yaakov l'divrei aposel, according to that view, the opinion that holds that the Vlad that's born from an Eved is posel afilu b'pnuya, even in a case of an Eved who had a relationship with a Pnuya non-married woman. Well, the Divrei HaMachshir, on the other hand, the view that holds that the Vlad from an Eved is kosher is Machshir afilu b'Ashes each. If an Eved has a relationship with an Ashes each, the Vlad is not a Mamzer. So it's impossible, therefore, to say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, who said Ein Lo Takana, he means to say that he was Mekadesh an Isha, meaning the Chetzia Eved was Mekadesh an Isha, and the reason why Ein Lo Takana is because he was Baal Ashes Ish. We have a principle here formulated by Nardoi that a machshir af Ashes Ish. So if you're telling me that the Eved Baal Apnuya, the Vlad is kosher, then even in the case of an Ashes ish, the Vlad is kosher. Which is a little bit of a strange idea that an Eved had a relationship with an Ashes ish and the Vlad is not a Mamzer. But then again, that comes back to our original discussion that the Bia of an Eved is not exactly a full-fledged Bia in halacha. It's not like he's a Yisrael. He doesn't have a full-fledged Kedushas Yisrael. Ushneim, whether it's the one who's Machshir the Vlad, who's born from an Eved, Haba, even al Ashes ish, or the Posel, who says that if an Eved has a relationship even with the Pnuya, the child is a Mamzer, Lola Maduhu Ella Me'eshes Av. Everything is derived, all the dinim of Mamzerus and the Psul Kol of the Vlad are derived from your model case of an erva, which is called Ashes Av. And that's the pasuk in Parshas Kiteitzei, Dvarim Perek Gimel, Lo Yikach Ashes Aviv. So we're talking now about the Iser erva of Ashes Aviv. And the pasuk there in Smichus writes, Lo yovo mamzer b'kal Hashem. So the Gemara later on in Daf Mem Tes says that your paradigmic case of mamzerus is Eishes Av. If a man has relationship with Eishes Aviv, the Vlad is a mamzer. And from Eishes Aviv with the binyan Av, we will derive anything similar to Eishes Av. That if a man has a relationship with a woman who's prohibited, a forbidden relationship similar to Eishes Av, the Vlad is a mamzer. Manda Pasil, according to that Mandiyomar, who says that if the Vlad is born from an Eved Abol Bas Yisrael, he's kosher, he's pasul. Savar, we're going to find a very strong similarity between Eved and the Erev of Eishes Av. Why? Ma Eishes Av, what's unique about Eishes Av that causes mamzerus? The lo tafsi be kedushin, therefore the Vlad is a mamzer. Af kol the lo tafsi be kedushin, a Vlad mamzer. So in the case of an Eved or an Akum for that matter, Habal Bas Yisrael, there's no tfisas kedushin. Therefore the Vlad is a mamzer. Umanda machshir, according to the opinion that a Vlad that's born from an Eved and Akum, Habal Bas Yisrael is a kosher, Savar, he has a different definition of the essence of Eishes Av as the paradigm in case of Mamzerus. Ma Eishes Av dilidei lo tafsi be kedusha, but lachrini tafsi be kedusha. If the son himself would be Makadesh, the ex-wife of his father, there's no tfisas kedusha because ein kedusha tofsim b'chayvei krisis. But lachrini, if anyone else were to marry this same woman after the death of her husband or after her husband gave her a divorce, there would be tfisas kedushin. That's going to be your paradigmic case of Eishes Av. She is included in kedushin with anyone but the Erev of Eishes Av. Lafuki, to exclude Oved Kochav Eved Lo Tafsi Be Kedushin Klal. There's no tfisas kedushin in the case of an Eved or an Akum on any side whatsoever, and therefore it's not similar to that paradigmic case of Eishes Av, and therefore the Vlad is not going to be a mamzer in the case of an Eved. Elo itmar Rav Yehuda, when Rav Yehuda said that ein lavlad takona, meaning the Vlad of the Eved is a mamzer, kegon shebal eishes ish, who's a chetzia Eved, chetzia ben chornu, who had a relationship with an eishes ish, and now we're talking about a Jewish girl who's married to a Jewish man. V'nimtza tzad cheresh shebo mishtamish bi eishes ish. The half of the Eved that is a ben chorin, and therefore has the status of Yisrael, he's having a relationship with an Eishes Ish, and therefore the Vlad is a mamzer. So it's the Tzad ben Chorin Shabo that generates mamzerus, because that Tzad ben Chorin Shabo makes him into a Yisrael like any other Yisrael who, if he has Chas Shom, a relationship with an Eishes Ish, the Vlad is a mamzer. Now, I apologize. We skipped a few lines, but I think pedagogically it was a good idea. But let's go back. Manda Machshir, what does the Shita that says the Vlad of an Eved Abol Bas Yisrael is kosher, what does he do with the paradigmic case of Eishes Av? Ma Eishes Av dilidei lo tafsi be kedushin lachrini tafsi be kedushin lafuki ovi kochav eved lo tafsi be kedushin klal. So again, just to reiterate and reemphasize what we said before, that you need the case of a marriage or a relationship with a man in which this Bas Yisrael, in such a case, no matter which individual member of that category you would have a relationship with, there's no tfisas kedushin. So in the case of an Eved, there's not a single Eved on the world that could create a valid kedushin. And therefore, the situation of Eved Habal Masyo is not similar to the paradigmic case of Mamzeris, which is Eishazah. And when Rabbi Yehuda said that the child is a mamzer, we're talking about a Chatzi Eved Chatzi Ben Chorin, who had a relation with an Eishes each, and therefore the Tzad Cheresh Shabo Mishtamish Beishes each of the Vlad is a mamzer. So that's all because the Tzad Cheresh. Omar Avina, Omar Li Rav Gaza, Ikla. Ikla in Hebrew is called Nizdamen. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Avin, La Asrin. Rabbi Yossi came to the city of Rabbi Gaza. There was a situation of a non-married Jewish girl, and an Eved had a relationship with her. The Achshir and Rabbi Yossi Bar Ovin was Machshir the Vlad. And there was another story of an Eishes Ish, and an Eved had a relationship with an Eishes Ish, Upasil, and Rabbi Yossi, in that case, said that the Vlad is a mamzer. We see that Rabbi Yossi Bar Ovin does not hold like Nardoi. Nardoi said that Man de Machshir B'Pnuya, Machshir Gam Eishes Ish. It was saying even if you're Machshir B'Pnuya, nevertheless you Posil B'Eishes Ish. And that's indeed the Shita of Rabbi Yossi Bar Ovin. Rav Sheshes, I have to correct you. That's not the story that happened. Lididi Omar Li Rav Gaza. I had a personal connection with Rav Gaza. And Lo Rabbi Yossi Bar Oven Hava, El Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Zvida Hava. The one who is Mora Hora, a Hora in that story, in the city of Rabbi Gaza, was not Rabbi Yossi Bar Oven, but rather Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Zvida. The Achshar, Bein B'Pnuya, Bein B'Eishes Ish. He was Machshir the Vlad of an Eved Shabal Bas Yisrael, whether she's a Pnuya or an Eishes Ish, because there's no Tfisas Kedushin with an Eved at all, and we accept the logic of Nardoi. Amalei Rav Acha Brei de Rabba L'Ravina, Ikla Meimar Li Asrin. Meimar on one occasion visited us in our place. The Achshir, he was Machshir, the Vlad who was born from an Eved Habal Bas Yisrael. Bein B'Pnuya, Bein B'Eishes Ish. So this tradition of Rav Sheshes stands in sharp contrast to that of Ravina. And there's going to be an issue here about the Shita of Rabbi Yossi Bar Ovin. According to the transmission of Ravina, Rabbi Yossi Bar Ovin pasul the Vlad in a case of an Eved Shebal Eishes Ish. And that's against Nardoi. Nardoi was Machshir B'Pnuya, Machshir B'Eishes Ish. Rav Sheshes, in his transmission of Rabbi Yossi Bar Ovin, reconciles Rabbi Yossi with Nardoi. And why? Because according to that quote and that record of Rabbi Yossi's statement, Achshir Bein B'Pnuya Bein B'Eishes Ish, even if the Eved had a relationship with an Eishes Ish, the Vlad is kosher, which is the same as Nardoi, Manda Machshir, Machshir Afilu B'Eishes Ish. And all this is based on the fact that since in the case of an Eved, there's no Tfisas Kedushin in an Eved, even Lacheren, And that's accepting the logic of Nardoi. Omale Rav Acha Breder Rav de Rabba Leravina. Ikla Meimer Lasrin, a Meimer came to visit us. The Achshir, a Meimer was Machshir, the Vlad that was born from an Eved Abol Bas Yisrael, Bein Bepnuya, Bein Be'eshesish, just like Nardoi. And the Gemara concludes, Ve'hilchis, so the bottom line in the ruling that's accepted is that Ovid Kochavim, the Eved Abol Bas Yisrael, Vad Kosher, Bein Bepnuya, Bein Be'eshesish. So obviously this has tremendous ramifications la'alocha. As far as Mamzerus is concerned, we're paskening that the Binyan Av, the archetype of Mamzerus, is Eishes Av. And the Eved case, since there's no Tfisus Kedushin, neither for him nor for anyone else, therefore there's no Mamzerus. Rava Achshera, the Rav Mori Baruch. Notice Rav Mori's name, usually the name of a great scholar or any Jew is named after his, Ben, his father. Here it's Ben Rachel, his mother. What happened here? The answer is that Rachel had a relationship with a non-Jew. And from that relationship, Rav Mori was born, a good friend Mori. Umanye bepurse de Bavel, and in a place called Purse de Bavel, I don't know if he tells you where to find it. Not sure. But there they appointed him, Rav Mori Bar Rachel, as the Mamuna al Hakol. The Afal Gav the Omer Mar. We have a statement in terms of what's called Minui Kol, Minui Parnas al Yisrael, Som Tasim Alecha Melch Mikar Vachecha, Kol Mesimos, all Minuyim, Shata Mesim, Al Yehu El Mikar Vachecha. A ger is not considered Mikar Vachecha, and we don't count him, and we don't appoint him as a Parnas on the Tzibur. So why did Rav appoint Mori Bar Rachel as a Parnas al Tzibur? The Gemara is assuming that Mikerev Achecha means that the father has to be Jewish. It's not sufficient that the mother is Jewish. And the Gemara explains, no, that's not so. Hi, Rav Mori Bar Rachel came unto Imo mi Yisrael, Mikerev Achecha Krina Bey. All we need in order for the candidate to qualify as Kerev Achecha is that his mother be a Yisrael. That's enough to appoint him as a Parnas al Tzibur. Now, whether this is the so for Sanhedrin and Dini Mominis, that's a discussion in the Ramban right here in our Sugya. He thinks that Imo Yisrael is the critical issue of Mikerev Achecha for Dini Mominos, for a Dayan to Paskin and Dini Mominos. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin Lamed Beis seems to assume that Ledini Mominos, even Gerim Aksherim Ladun, even a ger who doesn't have a Jewish mother is kosher Ladun, which is against our Gemara, because we need at the very least that his mother be Jewish. And the Ramban answers that even a kosher who qualifies to judge Dini Mominos, nevertheless, we won't appoint him over the city as the Rosh Ir or any Minu Shel Srara. So that's halacha in Minu. Avdei, the Eved of Rabbi Chia bar Ami, Adbala, he was matbil, meaning he took a non-Jewish woman and he sort of forced her into water that was a mikvah, in order to marry. That's called tfilas nida, not l'shem tfilas gerus. Now, this is very odd because it sounds like she wasn't on board for gerus. And if the tefillah was l'shem gerus, but it's not a tefillah, then the Gemara says that echad isha nisgaira l'shem isha, echad isha shenisgaira l'shem ish, einom gerin. So getting back to our case, Amar of Yosef, Yachilnu lachshuri ba. I have the ability to be machshir, that woman, that she should be considered a Bas Yisrael Kshera, that Ovedes Kochavim. And even if she wasn't Tovelis L'Shem Gerus, and this is based on a Gemara later on that we'll get to, Daf Mem Vav, that Li'olam Eino Gerat Sheyamol V'Yitvol, but nevertheless the Tefillah, if it was done L'Nidasa, that's considered a Maisa Tefillah, and it's Ola L'Tefillah L'Shem Tefillas Gerus. Now, it could be that on a deeper level, what the Gemara has in mind here is that if she was Toveles for the purpose of Taras Nidasa, then inherent, latent in that Kavana is a Kavana for Das Yehudis, because the Goyim don't have to purify themselves from the contamination of Nida. Ubibrata, and therefore I could be machshir the brat is the bas, that she can be ksheira kol bas Yisrael, even though she's the bas of an eved abol bas Yisrael. And why is that? Because the mother was this gaira, and once her gerus is validated, she's like a bas Yisrael, and therefore the bas is ksheira. Rav Yosef now explains what he meant. But I could be machshir her, kidder of Asi. The Yomer of Asi, there was a person who called him Bar Armiasa. He was like the son of an Armenian, which means that his mother was not Tovelis L'Shem Gerus. And Rav Asi said, Mi lo Tovalno L'Nidusa. It's enough that the mother was Tovelis L'Nidus. And she was Bavadai, there's no question about it, she was Tovelis. And therefore, he is not the son of a guy. We see clearly that Rav Asi holds that Tfilas Nida is Ola L'Shem Gerus. It's valid as a Tfilas Gerus. And here too, in our case, of Hahi Ovedes Kochavim, etc., is also La Tfilah, L'Shem Gerus. And that's Rabbi Yossi's opinion, that Tfilas Nida is all L'Shem Gerus. It's Pella Vashita. Therefore, she's the Israelis Gemura, and Bibrata, and her daughter I could be Machshir, because we have Allah that Oved Kochavim, the Eved Abal Bas Yisrael, of Lad Kosher. But now the Gemara brings the Maisa that we had earlier from Ravasi, Hahu Davi Karile Bar Aramyaita, meaning that his mother did not have a Tfilah L'Shem Gerus, and he is the son of an Aramit. Omer Rav Asi Milo Tovlu L'Nidusa. You're telling me that she's the son, or he's the son of an Aramit. How could that be so? What do you mean? The mother was not Tovelis L'Shem Gerus, but so what? She was Tovelis L'Shem Nidus. So she was Vadai Tovla. And that Tvila is Ololol Tvilas Gerus, because Oved Kochavim, and Ovedes Kochavim, I should be more precise, doesn't go around and dunk herself into a kosher mikvah for the sake of nidus. Vadai Kiblal Atzma Das Yehudis B'Tfilosa. It's a kind of an Umdana Demucha that she accepted Das Yehudis. We have a similar case now. Hahu Davi Korile. People used to call him Bar Aramah. He's the son of an Arami. So Aviv Nachri, the Ima Israel. So his father was an Arami and his mother was a Jewish woman. And they called him Bar Arma. Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Milo Tova Lekirya. We have a Tefillah L'Shem Gerus. Only Jewish people at Tovil Lekeri. And this man went ahead, he was Tovil L'Shem Keri. Is Ololo Tefillah L'Shem Gerus. We're going to say that he was Mekabel Alatzmo Das Yehudis. Omar Rav Chama Bar Guria. Omar Rav. Halokeach Eved min ha'oved kochavim v'kodem v'tobel Hashem ben chorim. Kona atzmo ben chorim. My timer. We'll go over this in just a minute. Oved kochavim gufalo kanile, my de kanile, hu de matile litzvah. So an Eved Knani who is purchased by a Yisrael needs Tvila. And this Tvila signifies Kabbalas HaMitzvos Halatzma. Again, those mitzvahs and Eved is obligated. Now, if this Eved was purchased by a Yisrael, then the halacha establishes that his kavana in his tefillah was l'shem berus. So our case is that a guy owns an eved and a Jewish person bought the Eved from a guy, and v'kodem v'tovel l'shem ben chorin. An Eved Knani who's Nikvel Yisrael is purchased by a Jew, tzarich tefillah, but tefillah itself constitutes a kabbalas all mitzvahs, as far as the Eved is concerned, whatever mitzvahs an Eved is chayav in. And the answer is, if this Eved is Nikvel Yisrael, then he had in mind that his tefillah, he would be Tovel L'Shem Beres Gemura. And the Gemara is going to substantiate this with a Kal V'chomer. Kana Atzo ben Chorin is kosher. Kana Atzo ben Chorin, which means he's Yisrael Gamur, and he goes L'Cherus. Is the Gemara asks my timer, what's the logic that by virtue of the fact that he was Tovil L'Shem ben Chorin, he's Konis Atzmo, and he's considered ben Chorin? The Gemara says here on Daf Mem Vav, Oved Kochavim Gufa Lo Kanile. A guy doesn't have a kinyan on the Guf Eved Knani. I mean, that requires a lot of study. But my de Kanile, whatever kinyan he does have, it's called a kinyan Masechet. He doesn't know the Gufa Shalevet. Hu de Matile Israel. That's what he transfers over to the Israel who buys the Eved. And now the Eved who's Kanu Israel, that's only for Masechet Dayan. The Israel cannot purchase the Gufo Shel Eved because the guy himself who sold him the Eved doesn't own the Gufo Shel Eved. And Kevon the Kadam v'Tavul Shem Ben Chorin Afke L'Shibudei. All right, so this will be more of an intense sugya that will Mirza Hashem leave for tomorrow. Thank you very much.